In 2005, a group of local activists recognized a needed presence at the Arizona Capitol to speak on behalf of its citizens to preserve our freedoms and created the Arizona Citizens Defense League. The AzCDL is made up of an all-volunteer, non-partisan, dedicated group of men and women who work full-time testifying at committee hearings, monitoring floor votes, lobbying heavily on behalf of our more than 20,000 members. Between legislative sessions, we look for ways to improve existing laws and meet with legislators on proposed bills to provide valuable insight from the Arizona citizens' perspective to ensure that our freedoms and liberties are preserved. If you want to protect your right to keep and bear arms in Arizona, then you want to join the Arizona Citizens Defense League.
What up, girl?
Hey, long time no see.
I know, it's been, 5
week.
days?
Exactly 1 week.
5 days, yeah, exactly 1 week. There we go.
Oh, this is too big on my hand.
Yeah, you might have to scrunch it down.
Like, how do you
Maybe I was
it?
wearing it earlier because I have a big head.
I thought I had a big head, but apparently I don't. We'll just leave it like this and we'll see what happens.
All right, so you were down there at the National Conference for Gun Rights Policy Conference.
Yes.
And then, I don't know, somehow Cheryl swindled you. Hey, next weekend we're going to be doing... That's how she does it, right?
I mean, I wouldn't say swindle, but I think I committed to this one before GRPC.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. I mean, I'm like down the road, so it would be kind of embarrassing if I said, oh, that's just too far for me.
Anyway. So tell us about yourself.
So my name's Ashley, and I spent about 10 years running the Cody Firearms Museum, which is in Wyoming.
Okay.
It's one of the largest gun museums in the country. And I was very fortunate during that time that I got to completely gut the museum and then rebuild it. So we reopened in 2019, and then I stayed on for a few years to help my assistant transition to the curator position. And now I'm building museums all over the country, and yeah, and doing a lot of expert testimony on Second Amendment cases. And I just founded the University of Wyoming College of Law's Firearms Research Center with David Koppel and George Moxery.
Okay, that's
that
a
was
lot
just
of
a
stuff.
lot of information.
I'm doing this, I'm doing that. All right, now, so you revamped the museum.
Yes.
But then you had to find a replacement because you're going to go around the country and build more museums.
I like building museums. Yeah. Well, I didn't have to find a replacement. It was actually my assistant curator who then moved into the position. He's awesome. Totally the perfect person to kind of move into the...
How many square feet is this museum?
40,000.
All right, 40,000 square foot museum. How many guns do you have in this museum?
So we had about 7,000 firearms, and when we were all said and done,
Say it again.
7,000?
Can you imagine having 40,000 square feet as your own personal space with 7,000 guns? I'm trying to visualize this, and I can't bring it.
It's a lot of guns.
That's a lot. I'd probably have a heart attack if I walked in there.
A lot of people do. And
So
we were
this is
actually able to get a lot of them on display, which is pretty cool because most museums suck at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's stuff like things you can touch.
We have some interactive
Some of the big floor
things.
spaces and stuff like that.
Yeah, we had 4 firearm simulators when we reopened, although the upkeep on that is a little difficult. You can actually shoot a converted M2 machine gun. It was a pneumatic version, so you could just shoot it just to feel the recoil on it. Yeah.
The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun.
Yes.
Okay.
I like that.
I left
There's all
a
the
few
stats on it. Yeah.
Well, because our listeners probably
Sorry.
know, but some people may not know. That's a lot. Okay.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
So there were some hands-on, and then we have a whole science wing.
Okay.
So you could feel different trigger weights. That was sponsored by Timney Triggers. Then we had different sites that you could look through. We had a long-range rifle simulator, a shotgun simulator in there. This cool, weird diagram that you could move around that would show you how cartridges work.
Built Disneyland for gun owners, and this is in Wyoming.
It's in Wyoming, Cody, east gate of Yellowstone.
Geez. I got to go there. All right. So what's the next one being built?
Okay, so I've got several, and some of them I can't talk about, but I'll talk about the one, NDAs and stuff. But one of the ones I'm working on rebuilding is the LA Police Museum, which has the coolest collection I think I've ever seen. I love me some creepy shit. Am I allowed to swear? Sorry.
Dude, I do it all the time.
Okay,
Go for it.
They have all the guns that belong to Charles Manson, Tex Watson. They have the rope that was used to strangle Sharon Tate. They've got Patty Hearst M1 carbine. They've got all of the guns and vehicles from the North Hollywood shootout. Hillside Strangler, artifacts. So basically, if you're into true crime, like that's the place for you.
No, it makes total sense.
That's going to be a really long process just because we're kind of starting from the beginning, because it was basically a museum that law enforcement, whenever they get stuff, they kind of send it over there, but they didn't really have a lot of structure.
It's like their old evidence locker.
It actually is exactly that.
So you got these tags you're reading through. They got a catalog system that sucks, and you're like, this doesn't match this.
Exactly.
Inventory, this is supposed to be in that box, and it's over in the bottom of this box over there.
Yeah.
No, I totally get that.
Well, and then we've got, I'm doing just an exhibition up in Montana, the Matthew S. Browning. So John Moses Browning, his only full brother, Matthew, that side of the family moved up into Montana.
Okay.
And so the Matthew Browning Jr. collection is actually up there in an art museum. And so we're currently working on redesigning the wing that it houses the firearms. That's really cool because there's so many archives from the family that nobody's ever seen before. They're spicy. The Brownings were so spicy in the way that they talked about stuff. Like I was reading family archives where John Moses Browning was talking about like the end of World War I and like all kinds of stuff. Very colorful.
Everyone, for those of you that don't know, and I know the ones following live probably know, this is definitely going to be available to replay. Eventually, we'll probably make it public too. Thanks for asking that, Dave. I first learned how to shoot a Browning. That was the first handgun I ever fired was a Browning high power. Dad passed it on to me. I've completely refurbished this thing. I mean, it's blued, but I polished it for 7 days down to 3,000 grit sandpaper before I did.
Yeah.
So it's a mirror. It's the shiniest gun I've ever seen. And I keep it wrapped and I never touch it.
Yeah.
Because it's just a family heirloom. That's the gun I learned to shoot on. But the Browning family, for those of you that don't know, is kind of like the spiritual leader of firearms, in my personal opinion. Like he's right up there with our Lord and Savior.
I don't know if you should cross yourself when you're referring to a Mormon family.
But the amount of innovation that John Moses Browning did in the firearms industry is amazing.
So I want to point this out because I love this. I had somebody asking me about John Moses Browning at GRPC.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously John Moses Browning, brilliant inventor of both ammunition, like entire cartridges, and calibers, and then also firearms. But he didn't do it alone. So he had a full brother, Matthew Browning, and actually I think it was like 34 patents Matthew took out with John Moses Browning. But Matthew was more the business head of the company, and actually when they broke up with Winchester, the guy who was running Winchester, Thomas Bennett, had some choice words to say about Matthew Browning. But then there was also Ed Browning. His name was Jonathan Ed Browning. He was one of the half brothers. Yeah. Because if you're not familiar, John Moses Browning's dad, Jonathan, was a polygamist. They're very, very deeply rooted to the origins of the Mormon Church.
Okay.
Out of Utah, but. So,
that I didn't know.
Yeah, that's why when you crossed yourself, I was like, these are like.
I'm usually a pretty big history buff. But not really in that. So
John Moses Browning was not a polygamist because his wife was like, I'll kill you.
She must know my wife.
But so there was Jonathan Ed Browning. And so basically you had, John Moses coming up with a lot of the designs. Yeah. Then you had Matthew running the business. And then Ed Browning was actually making most of the prototypes that they were using, that they were testing out with John Moses Browning's designs. And then after he dies, John Moses Browning, Ed ends up having several designs that he sells to Winchester before his death. And so one of those is it's really nerdy. If people know they're like super niche Winchester history, he has this design for semi-automatic that ultimately becomes the G30 that David Marshall Williams, I'm saying a lot of words, Carbine Williams, who's credited with the M1 carbine, although that's its own long story. But he was working on that because Winchester was actually trying to replace the M1 Garand, and it's all based off of Ed Browning's design. So there's several players in the Browning family that don't get talked about.
So I've shot everything you mentioned.
Okay, except you have not shot a G30.
Probably.
They only made
probably not, but roughly everything else that you've mentioned, I had the pleasure of shooting. So I'm 10th generation Army.
Okay.
So like everything that you've mentioned, like my family has been involved with in shooting and have taken the war, etc. So all those designs are very similar, kind of mechanically in nature. And
I feel like some people would argue that Little subtle differences.
Well, yeah,
Nuance.
and then you look at some of the German manufactured weapons being made at that time. There's obviously very stiff competition.
Yeah.
All of that stuff just really fascinates me, how they fit together, work together, and you're thinking outside the box. Like, what else worked that way back then?
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's just amazing.
And I think one of my favorite things in history are, not necessarily failures, but things that we don't actually remember because the war ended, so we stopped, trying to develop something, and then it kind of gets forgotten. But it's also some stuff that's like really advanced. One of the guns that I think is really fascinating is the Burton light machine rifle. There's only one known in existence. It's at the Cody Firearms Museum. It's also in Battlefield 1. Randomly, somebody nobody asked us, but they put it in Battlefield 1. But it's an intermediate cartridge, selective fire rifle. So all the definitions of the word that I'm going to say that people are going to get really mad, but the Defense Intelligence Agency's definition for an assault rifle, not to be confused with assault weapon, but it fits all of those criteria, and it was developed towards the end of World War I. So you talk about the Sturmgewehr that's developed towards the end of World War II as kind of the pioneer of that genre of a firearm that then ultimately, turns into so many different guns around the world. But they were making, Winchester, of all places, was making pretty much the same technology at the end of World War I. But because the war ended, there was no reason in the U.S. government's mind to keep pushing
Allegedly. But they didn't ask us.
Oh, yeah.
There's no reason.
Yeah.
Yes, there is. I want one.
Yeah, right. It's so cool. But yeah, so it's one of those things that's so far ahead of its time. And for, whatever reason, they stopped trying to push forward on that design. So we don't even remember that. But we, and we associate that technology with World War II. But man, decades earlier, we had that technology. We just weren't putting it to good use.
Where can people find you, find out more about what it is you're doing?
So I have a website, sort of. I do have one. It's theguncode.com. And then I'm on Instagram at History and Heels. And then I'm on Facebook just under my name. And I have a Twitter, but I don't post because it's toxic.
Okay. That's awesome. I could talk to you for hours, but unfortunately, these folks want to get moving. So
all right,
we're going to drop back over to them. It was great talking to you.
Good talking to you. Thank you.
Thanks for spending time with us. Let's get over to these guys.